Hello everyone, today I will tell true horror stories about everyday life. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
A couple of years ago, a group of friends and I planned a camping trip in Yellowstone Park. The four of us had been camping multiple times in national parks before, but never one the size of Yellowstone. It was going to be close to a week-long trip of sightseeing and enjoying nature. We had planned out well the first couple of days of the trip, determining where we would be camping and places to see. After those first couple days though, we didn't have much of a plan, and we had decided that part of the adventure was being spontaneous and going wherever interested us. The first part of the trip went well, as we saw a lot of popular tourist attractions and had fun hanging out at night around our campsite. Towards the end of the trip, however, we were looking for a campsite to camp for the night and had a hard time finding one. We were in the stage of our trip where nothing was planned. It was already dark out, late at night, and every campground in the nearby area that we visited was already full and didn't have any room for us. Eventually, we drove past an open lot area that had some scattered fire pits created with stones and looked like a good spot to camp at. The area wasn't online and didn't show up as a named campsite on Google Maps, but clearly people had camped there before. The area was empty and we didn't see anyone, so we decided to set up camp there for the night. We had to set up the tent in the dark with flashlights. It was already late, so unlike the other nights of our trip, we didn't really hang out. We just got into the tent and fell asleep relatively quickly. I woke up in the middle of the night. My friends had shaken me awake and quietly whispered that something seemed off. Immediately, I understood what they were talking about, because from the woods surrounding our campsite, there was an odd number of bird sounds being made. It was still the middle of the night and not close to morning, so really, there should have been no birds making sounds, but instead, there were multiple different types of bird sounds every couple minutes. As a group, we agreed quietly and without turning on any sort of light to exit our tent and check it out. We left the tent and ended up huddling right beside our car, which was right next to the tent, since we had used the headlights for setting up the tent earlier. As we waited for our eyes to adjust to the dark and notice if we could see anything, the bird sounds got closer, but then stopped altogether. At that point, we knew that those sounds were not normal, and that it had to be people communicating to each other as they had been coming from different directions of the woods. It only took a quick nonverbal look at each other to decide that getting in the car would be the smartest thing to do right now. After scrambling to get in and then turn on the engine and lights, what we saw at the edge of the woods line running towards us was horrifying. There were two men humans running towards us. I call them humans because I don't even know if they were men or women because of how dirty and feral looking they were. We drove out of there as fast as we could, seeing three more people on the opposite side of the wood line when our headlights illuminated over that way. We drove through the night all the way until we had made it out of Yellowstone Park, abandoning our tent since all of us had our important valuables that we needed already in the car. None of us can recall or determine what area of the park we were in, but it definitely wasn't anywhere near a populated campground. We agreed to cut our camping trip a bit short and buy a hotel for the last night. We didn't go camping together again for a very long time after that scary night in Yellowstone. My friends from college and I tried to stay as close as possible after we had graduated from school. One of the ways that we would do this is by all of us taking a week off during the summer or fall and going on a camping road trip. Last year, we had planned together and decided to go camping in the mountains of Colorado towards the end of the summer. Once our flight landed, we purchased our rental car and we were off to the mountains for some camping. The second night that we were out there, we found a nice small camping area with individual lots. The lots were distanced from each other well enough to where it felt like our own individual campground, especially with all the trees surrounding us. We had picked a lot close to the small creek, which flowed nearby close to the highway, so that we could wash off after a long day of hiking. We set up our campsite while it was still light out that evening, so we wouldn't have to set anything up after dark. Once everything had been set up, we headed to a restaurant in the closest town for some dinner. We arrived back to the campsite after dark, and were surprised to see that our tent flap was open and stuff had been moved around outside. There was nobody in the clearing of our campsite, but somebody had gone through our stuff. It was a disturbing scene, but we proceeded with our night. It was time to get some sleep soon, so we grabbed our towels and shampoo and walked the short 5-minute walk to the stream to wash off. The water was very cold, but it was still quite refreshing in a way. It wasn't until after we had all exited the stream and were drying ourselves with towels on the riverbank that I noticed something. Across the stream on the opposite bank, there was 100% somebody watching us. Not wanting to alarm my friends, and also not wanting to let the figure on the other side of the stream know that I had seen them, I suggested that we go back to camp. On the walk back to our campsite, I briefly explained to my friends that I had seen someone across the stream from us in the woods. Between that and the incident of somebody rummaging through our tent while we were gone, it was decided that we would sleep in the car tonight. It was already hard to sleep and get comfortable in the car, and the added anxiety about the person I had seen by the stream didn't help either. The whole night I kept glancing out the windows, seeing if I would see anybody lurking around in the moonlight. At some point in the middle of the night, I glanced outside the car window, and my fears were true. There was a figure crouching down by the entrance of our tent, slowly unzipping it. I watched in horror as the person quickly found out there was nobody in our tent and then turned their head towards our car. The figure slowly disappeared around the back of our tent and began crouch walking closer to the car. I frantically woke up my friends at the same time while reaching into the driver's seat to honk the horn. The honking of the horn was effective as we watched the figure leave the campsite and disappear into the woods. What will always stick with me from that night is how the figure we had seen didn't run away frightened. They calmly just stood up and walked away from us into the woods, not bothered at all that we had seen them. Nobody got any more sleep that night in the car as we stayed up and alert and paranoid that the figure would try to return. We didn't have any more problems for the last couple hours of the night until it started getting light out. We had planned on staying at this camping location for 2 nights, but it's needless to say, we didn't stay there for the second night, even though we had already paid for it. We continued the rest of our camping trip, moving to a different campsite. Thankfully, there was no more issues the rest of the trip, but that night will be vivid in my memory for a long time. This story takes place many years ago when I was camping alone out in California. I haven't gone camping in many years now, but when I was younger, I would go on many weekend camping trips to get out in nature by myself and relax. I did these camping trips quite frequently, almost every other weekend it felt like. I loved being out in nature, but did not like the discomfort of sleeping on the ground in a tent. For how often I went camping, it made sense for me to buy a small little camper that would attach and be part of the bed of my truck. It was really nice and could comfortably fit me and even one more if I needed. One of my weekend trips, I drove about 5 hours away from my house to a beautiful area that I hadn't been to before. I spent the day doing a long hike and then cooling off in a peaceful lake during the evening. By nighttime, I had parked my truck in a quiet remote area sort of up a mountain so that I could have a nice view when I woke up in the morning. I was still up reading a book by flashlight when I heard footsteps outside and someone approaching the truck. Normally, I don't ever have people walking anywhere near my truck, so it was odd to hear for sure. Maybe I had parked in a bad spot or somewhere I wasn't allowed to be and somebody was coming to let me know. Either way, I didn't feel comfortable, especially since it was after dark at this point. I called out a greeting of, "Hello, who's there?" as the footsteps approached closer. A raspy male voice responded saying, "Hi there, I just wanted to check out your camper. Pretty nifty." I was really quite comfortable laying in my bed in the camper in the back of the truck, so I yelled out that I could show them the camper in the morning, assuming they were maybe camping nearby. There was no response from the man outside for what felt like a couple of minutes. Finally, I heard him muttering to himself, but couldn't make out anything of what he was saying. Assuming that was that, I went back to reading. Oddly though, I didn't hear any footsteps retreating away. The man had to still be standing there. He was, and after a few moments, I heard footsteps moving around my truck, but still not leaving. There was tiny little porthole-like windows on the side of my camper, which I kept covered with curtains at night. I looked outside, but couldn't see the man at all, and it sounded like he had walked to the front of my truck, Next thing I know, I heard some quiet thumps starting from the hood of my truck and eventually getting closer to me. Whoever this person was had the audacity to climb onto my truck and crawl onto the roof of my truck towards the camper in the bed of it. I was a person who took very good care of my truck, and this guy was pissing me off to say the least. I shouted out, alerting the person that I had a firearm with me, and if they didn't get off my truck and leave, I was going to come out with my gun. I heard the man get off of my truck and walk away a bit, but I still didn't hear their footsteps fade away as they would have if they had completely left. I got out of my camper with the firearm and my flashlight. Upon pointing the flashlight around, I saw the man crouching down near a bush about 40 feet away. As the flashlight illuminated him, he backed away farther into the darkness. I had had enough with whoever this person was at this point. I didn't know if it was somebody who had gone on drugs or somebody crazier, but I shouted to him to leave and not come back. I was already up at this point and was driving back home in the morning anyways, so I packed my stuff up and headed home early. Whether it be due to scary encounters such as I had with a person or something animal related, I've always had my firearm with me when I went camping, and I'm thankful that I had it on me that night. My family timeshares a cabin on a lake, and we go there about once a month. We have a pretty large family, and oftentimes we invite up friends or significant others with us as well. Because of how crowded the sleeping situation can get inside the small cabin, a group of us, normally the younger adults, will pitch a tent outside to sleep in. The best spot for the tent to be set up is on the sandy beachfront right by the water, since it's softer than the yard. One weekend towards the end of July, there were many people staying at the cabin that weekend. It was a perfect night outside, so a group of 4 had decided to sleep outside in the tent. The group included my older brother and his girlfriend, as well as my younger brother and me. That night, I was woken up to the sound of a boat engine on the lake. Sometimes fishermen would go out onto the lake in the middle of the night because they wouldn't have to deal with the daytime activities of jet skis and pontoons. The fishermen never came too close to anyone else's property though. This motor engine, although it was running quietly, was getting closer to our beach where the tent was set up. My older brother had also been awoken by the noise of the boat, so we went out together to check out what was going on. Walking out onto our dock, we saw a fishing boat slowly drifting by only about 15 to 20 feet from our dock. The moonlight revealed that the boat was empty. We watched, confused, as the boat drifted into our neighbor's beach area by the waves on the lake. Both my brother and I stood frozen on the dock, not knowing what to think about what we were seeing. The silence of the night was broken by our neighbor's dog barking, and then our 2 dogs joined in on the barking. My brother and I ran back down the dock towards the beach, and were about to start walking up the hill towards our cabin, when a figure emerged from the darkness of my neighbor's yard. The person had a black wetsuit on, and some type of mask with goggles on over their face. Our cabin and our neighbor's cabin are close to each other, and we saw the figure run past us about 90 feet away at most. They entered the boat and then drove away back out onto the lake, looking towards my brother and I standing on the beach by our tent as they drove away. We found out the next day that our neighbor's cabin had been broken into, but their dog scared the person away before anything happened or before anything was taken. It was an eerie experience, especially basically camping in the middle of all the action, seeing the empty boat and the figure escaping into the night. I don't think the person in the black wetsuit knew that we were camping out on the beach. Otherwise, I don't think they would have come so close with their boat. Our family still goes to that cabin fairly often, and hasn't seen the boat or the figure in the wetsuit anymore. But our parents use it as a scary story, exaggerating a bit, to spook people before they go out and sleep in the tent on the beach. Many years ago, a friend and I decided to take a bicycle trip together. Our goal was to bike most of the day on bike trails, and then find a place to camp at night. We had made good progress towards our destination, and arrived in about 2.5 days. We were going to relax in the small town that we were in for the rest of the day, by swimming in the lake and getting a nice dinner in a restaurant, after eating beans and bread for the last couple of days we had been biking. The bike trails we were on didn't really have any good camping spots, so we had been finding places that would work, like the edges of parks and the backs of cemeteries. We found a quiet spot in the cemetery to camp for a night before starting the last half of the trip back home the next day. The spot we found really was nice. It was at the back area of the cemetery, out of view from the main street, and there was a nice area of mulch which we set our tent up over to sleep on. That night was also the night before the 4th of July, so there was a decent amount of fireworks which my friend and I watched sitting outside in our tent. The sun had already set, and while we sat outside our tent, there were multiple instances where we felt like we saw something move, or some sort of motion out of the corner of our eyes. My friend and I had already slept in graveyards earlier on this bike trip, and we had gotten into the habit of walking around and reading graves as it was something to do to pass the time. Partly because of the odd movements that we felt like we were seeing, and partly because we were bored, we grabbed a flashlight and began walking around checking out the area. We stumbled across one grave that saddened us. It was a baby's grave with a bunch of toy cars on the ledge of the grave. We normally didn't get spooked in graveyards, but we both glanced at each other as it got really windy and chilly for a second, and then stopped as soon as it started. Down the row from us, we saw a tiny opaque figure gliding away from us. It was a child-sized figure that we saw for a few seconds before it simply vanished. Thoroughly spooked now, we went back to the tent and had a restless night of sleep, waking up often. We were both relieved when we woke up while the sun was rising and we could begin to pack up and start our ride home. I opened the flap of the tent and was about to step outside when I saw something lying on the ground right outside of the tent. There were 2 toy cars laying outside, the same type from the grave that we had seen last night. After both my friend and I swore that we didn't get up in the night and move those cars at each other, we walked them over to the baby's grave, and sure enough, there were 2 empty spots where cars had been last night. We finished wrapping up our stuff and were on our way, leaving the graveyard. I had never previously believed in spirits of any kind, but I wasn't skeptical anymore, as I had seen with my own eyes that there was some sort of presence at the cemetery we had stayed at.